Meera, Shankar, is this about optics, or do you believe that something substantive will be achieved in this G20 summit? And if so, what can be achieved?
Well, I do hope that we are able to achieve something substantial. As of now, it looks like the issue of Ukraine is holding up a consensus on a joint statement. And it should be our endeavor to try to insulate the differences that have arisen over the Ukraine conflict and move ahead on global challenges which are becoming increasingly urgent and which require action by all countries. So that's my hope. I'm not sure that the hope will be fulfilled. I think we have to wait and see. As of now, the world is more divided than it has been for a very long time, because the relationship between the great powers have become increasingly fraught. This was not the case when the G20 was set up. And at that time, it was able to make substantive progress after the 2008 financial crisis on stabilizing the global economy, having a coordinated stimulus, putting in place regulations for banking and banking norms. But today, I think it's become much more difficult to achieve consensus. But I do hope that we can insulate or isolate these geopolitical differences and move ahead on substantive issues of climate change, climate finance, how to strengthen international cooperation in the event of another pandemic, how to accelerate the global economy, which is in a downturn right now, and how to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think these are all issues which are of great urgency for the world. And I do hope we can focus on these and get something substantial.
Let me bring in Michael Kugelman at this moment. Michael Kugelman, you heard from Meera, Shankar. There is hope that we can overcome the sharp divisions that have emerged, particularly post-Ukraine, in what is increasingly seen as a multipolar world. China and Russia not sending, the presidents of the two countries not coming. Do you believe that the G20 can really overcome the deep divisions that lie post-Ukraine and come together on issues of commonality, be it climate change, be it a way to find economic sustainability, a way out of the debt crisis? Do you believe these are issues that can be wrestled with in a two-day summit and a Delhi declaration can emerge?
Well, I fully agree with Ambassador Shankar that the challenge for India as host is to put up some type of firewall between the difficult, complex, controversial geopolitical issues and then the many less controversial issues where you really can get a consensus. And she had mentioned some of those you have as well. Something like membership for the African Union. That's something I would see as a low-hanging fruit. One issue where one would think that a consensus can be generated. And I think also look at last year at the Bali declaration after the G20 meeting in Indonesia last year. There was a lot of division and tensions with the G20 membership then as well, but they still came out with the statement. It was watered down a bit, but one thing it did that was quite clever, and I think that may happen this year as well, is that where there were cases of disagreement, that was denoted by using text such as most members believe or many members believe. Clearly that doesn't reflect a consensus. But I think it's more important to have a document, a joint statement, that conveys a lack of consensus than no joint statement at all. I think the optics of there not being a joint statement would be very suboptimal, certainly for New Delhi as host, but also for the G20 on the whole. You really need to have that. But keep in mind that to this point, every ministerial level G20 session that has happened under India's presidency has not created some type of consensus document. So certainly the stakes are high, but I do think it is possible to come out with some type of statement that reflects not a total consensus, but at least a partial one.
Andrew, KP Lewing, as we've seen and was mentioned by Michael Kugelman, over the last year, since India took over the presidency, we haven't had a consensus on any of the major issues. When the finance ministers also met in Bengaluru, there was hope that there would be a consensus on trying to push for financial stability. That didn't happen. Do you believe, as there are those in this country, that China in particular does not want to, is being seen as some kind of a hurdle towards building this consensus? I want to, before I come to you, just play what the US said about China, and then I want you to respond to that. Are the Chinese going to be seen as the country that will prevent a consensus at G20? Just listen in for a moment, and I want you to then respond on the role that China intends to play at the G20. Listen in.
As far as the question of tensions between India and China affecting the summit, really that's up to China. If China wants to come in and play the role of spoiler, of course that option is available to them. What I think the chair, India, will encourage them to do, what we, the United States, and every other member, virtually every other member of the G20 will do, is encourage them to come in a constructive way on climate, on multilateral development bank reform, on debt relief, on technology, and set aside the geopolitical questions and really focus on problem solving and delivering for the developing countries.
Can we be optimistic that China will set aside differences, focus on areas of convergence?
Well, first of all, China is a very staunch supporter of international trade. China is the world's largest trading partner, and 130 countries have China as the largest trading partner. We'll compare with the United States 58. And of course, China's economy depends on international trade and international cooperation. And so China supports a more multipolar world order where all countries are treated equally and play a part. I think that this is exemplified by the current meeting also going on in ASEAN, where, of course, the ASEAN members, together with China, India, and other countries, have formed the world's largest trading bloc, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, according to a third of the world's GDP and a third of the world's economy. So I don't think that China wants to be a spoiler in the G20. But China is represented very strongly by its Prime Minister. But I agree that there are very serious dividing lines. The G20 is supposed to address the world's most pressing problems. Now, what are the world's most pressing problems at the moment? It's the Ukraine war, on which not all sides agree with the American rhetoric of sanctioning Russia. That's the end game. Even India is not on all fours with the United States. And then, of course, there is the almost at war kind of confrontation between the United States and China, disrupting global supply and value chains. And then all this rhetoric about democracy against autocracy, which without regard to the outcome of various political models, whether the countries, the people under different ideologies have seen their lives miraculously improved, regardless of the ideology. So there are lots of dividing lines. And the trick of the G20 is not to find the lowest common denominator, but the highest common denominator, focusing on common issues like climate change. And even there's considerable difference between the global south and the advanced countries in terms of financial aid to the global south. But I think that some form of words could be found. But the most important thing is not the form of words, it's the political will that can be mobilized behind the statement.